In the late 1800s, when America was filled with fortunes made from railroads, steel, and banking, there rose a house so extraordinary that it seemed more like a royal palace than a private home. It wasn't just large, it was almost unbelievable in scale, with over 100 rooms, sweeping gardens, sports fields, and grounds designed by one of the greatest landscape architects in history. This place was called Shadowbrook, and for a short time, it stood as the second largest house in the entire United States. But Shadowbrook didn't appear out of thin air. Behind this enormous mansion was a family whose story was as grand and dramatic as the house itself. The dreamers were Anson Phelps Stokes and his wife, Helen Phelps Stokes, two people who had both wealth and ambition, and who wanted to leave behind a legacy that would last for generations. The Stokes family. Wealth from the beginning. Anson Phelps Stokes came into the world in 1838 in New York City, during a time when the city was already buzzing with industry, trade, and ambition. Unlike many men who built fortunes during the Gilded Age, Anson wasn't starting from nothing. He belonged to a family that had already been wealthy for years, which placed him firmly in the world of old money. His father was a key figure in Phelps Dodge and Company, one of the most powerful and profitable businesses in America at the time. The company dealt in international trade, importing and exporting goods, and even owned mining operations. That meant steady streams of income and influence. The Stokes family wasn't just rich, they were respected. Their name appeared on Mrs. Astor's 400, a famous list of the most important families in New York high society. Being included on that list meant you were not only wealthy, but also fashionable and influential. The Stokes family regularly mingled with the Vanderbilts, the Astors, and other powerful dynasties of the Gilded Age. When Anson grew older, he naturally stepped into the family business. Eventually, he became a leader in Phelps Dodge and Company, determined to expand the family's influence and protect their fortune. Marriage to Helen Phelps. While Anson already had immense wealth and social standing, his marriage to Helen Phelps made the family even stronger. Helen was the sole heir to her father's large fortune, which meant she brought her own riches into the marriage. When Anson and Helen combined their wealth, the result was staggering. Together, they had the means to live a life of unimaginable luxury. The couple settled into a fashionable townhouse on Madison Avenue in New York City. It was elegant, modern for its time, and perfectly located for people of their status. Before long, they started a large family, 9 children in total. Their home became a lively place, filled with laughter, noise, and the constant energy of so many kids under one roof. Why the city wasn't enough. As glamorous as their Madison Avenue townhouse was, raising 9 children in Manhattan wasn't easy. The city was crowded and busy, filled with dangers for children. There were carriages rushing down the streets, construction on almost every block, and little open space for kids to play freely. For the Stokes children, there was no yard to run in, no wide-open fields for games, and very little privacy. Anson and Helen began to think seriously about giving their family a retreat outside of the city. They wanted space, fresh air, and a place where their children could grow up surrounded by nature instead of brick and stone. That's when the couple began looking for a country estate. The Staten Island Mansion. Their first escape from New York City was a Second Empire-style mansion on Staten Island, built in 1862. This was not a small country house. It was large, stylish, and filled with fine details. Inside, one of the highlights was a wood-paneled library lined with shelves of books and decorated with art. The Stokes family enjoyed this estate for many years. The children had more freedom to play, explore, and run around the property. Anson filled his time with hobbies like yachting, hunting, and sports. For a while, the Staten Island home gave the family everything they wanted. But as the years passed, Staten Island began to change. What had once been quiet countryside slowly transformed into a more crowded, busier area. New homes were built, construction was constant, and the peaceful charm of the retreat faded away. By the late 1870s, Staten Island no longer felt like the private escape the Stokes family desired. So, the couple began searching again, this time for something bigger, more private, and far more impressive: homestead and the birth of Shadow Brook. After their years on Staten Island, Anson Phelps Stokes and Helen Phelps Stokes were ready for something grander. They had 9 children who were growing older and more energetic by the day. Their townhouse in New York was crowded, and Staten Island had lost its peaceful charm. What they wanted now was more than just a retreat. They wanted an estate that would truly reflect their wealth, power, and place in society. That search led them to the Berkshires in Massachusetts, a region already famous among the wealthy elite. The Berkshires were known for their fresh mountain air, rolling hills, and natural beauty. It was the perfect escape from noisy, industrial New York. The Homestead Mansion. When the Stokes family arrived in the Berkshires, they set their eyes on an estate called Homestead. Unlike their Staten Island home, Homestead was already massive. The mansion had more than 40 rooms, including a gigantic ballroom complete with a minstrel gallery, a balcony where musicians could play during dances and parties. Inside, the house had wide corridors, towering ceilings, and luxurious details that made it ideal for entertaining. For the Stokes family, Homestead was more than just a house. It was a stage where they could host glittering social events. Their teenage children could invite friends, and Anson and Helen could welcome other wealthy families to dine, dance, and enjoy concerts in the ballroom. Homestead quickly became a lively place. Guests would arrive for grand gatherings, staying up late into the night while music echoed through the halls. The children explored every corner of the house and its grounds, playing games and running through the gardens. But for all its size, Homestead still wasn't enough. The 9 children kept growing, and the family needed even more room, not just for daily life, but for the kind of large-scale entertaining that the Gilded Age demanded. The dream begins. By the late 1800s, the Stokes family decided to take a bold step. Instead of buying another existing house, they would build one themselves. And not just any house. They dreamed of something so impressive, so enormous that it would stand among the greatest mansions in America. The Stokes family wanted their new home to make a statement. It would be bigger than Homestead, bigger than their Staten Island estate, and far more majestic than their Madison Avenue townhouse. It would not only be a comfortable retreat for their family, but also a symbol of their power and influence. This dream house would become Shadowbrook. Hiring the architects. To bring their vision to life, the Stokes family hired the most celebrated architectural firm of the era, McKim, Mead, and White. This firm was famous for designing some of the most important buildings in the country, from libraries to mansions to grand public structures. If you wanted a building that would impress everyone, they were the team to call. But soon, trouble appeared. Helen Stokes had strong opinions about what she wanted, and she wasn't afraid to voice them. She often clashed with Stanford White, one of the firm's most famous architects. Their arguments grew so heated that Helen eventually fired him from the project. Instead of continuing with McKim, Mead, and White, Helen brought in a lesser-known architect named H. Neil Wilson. While Wilson wasn't as famous, he worked closely with the Stokes family and gave them exactly what they wanted. Building Shadow Brook. Construction on Shadow Brook began in the late 1800s. It was a project on a scale few had ever seen before. More than 500 workers labored for nearly 2 years to complete the mansion. The finished result was staggering. Shadowbrook had over 100 rooms, making it the second largest private house in the United States. Only the Biltmore Estate in North Carolina, built by George Washington Vanderbilt II, was larger. The architectural style of Shadowbrook was Tudor Revival, which made the mansion look like something out of medieval England. It had tall chimneys, half-timbered walls, stucco, stone, and a roof covered in brown tiles. From a distance, it looked less like a home and more like an ancient castle. But the grandeur didn't stop with the house itself. The Stokes family hired Frederick Law Olmsted, the legendary designer of Central Park in New York City, to design the surrounding grounds. Olmsted created sweeping lawns, elegant gardens, stables, tennis courts, croquet lawns, and sports fields. Shadowbrook wasn't just a mansion. It was an entire kingdom spread across the Berkshire Hills. The inside of Shadowbrook. Entering. Shadowbrook was like stepping into another world. The moment guests walked into the foyer, they were greeted with towering ceilings, carved plaster decorations, massive furniture, and a grand fireplace that seemed fit for royalty. The house was filled with themed rooms, each decorated with unique styles. The Pompeian Hall. This room was exotic and dramatic. It had painted panels, carved figures, treasures collected from the Stokes' travels, and even a tiger skin rug. Chinese porcelain and potted plants added to the feeling that the family had gathered treasures from around the world. The morning room. In contrast, this room was light and cheerful. It had silk wallpaper, white walls, and plaster garlands decorated with floral patterns. Sunlight streamed through the windows, making the space glow. The parlor. This was dominated by a Gothic-style fireplace covered in spiraling vines. It felt heavy, dramatic, and medieval. The library. The library had Gothic arches, stained glass, and antique English furniture. Its unpainted woodwork and brick walls gave it a cozy, almost church-like feeling. Shadowbrook also had 3 dining rooms, each larger and grander than the last. The biggest dining room was so huge that its rug alone measured 30 feet by 48 feet. And, of course, there was a ballroom. The walls were covered in carved wood panels, and the ceiling had dazzling patterns lit by electric lights, a very modern touch for the late 1800s. Upstairs, there were 20 guest suites for visitors. On the 3rd floor, the 9 Stokes children each had their own private bedroom and bathroom, something that was considered an incredible luxury at the time. Shadowbrook wasn't just a house, it was a world of its own. Life at Shadowbrook and Anson's tragedy. When the enormous mansion of Shadowbrook was finally complete, the Stokes family wasted no time filling it with life, laughter, and excitement. The home wasn't just a building, it was the center of family gatherings, holiday celebrations, and lavish parties that brought together some of the wealthiest families of the Gilded Age. Everyday life at Shadowbrook. For the 9 Stokes children, Shadowbrook must have felt like a dream. Each child had a private bedroom and bathroom, something that was almost unheard of in the late 1800s. In most wealthy families, children were expected to share rooms, but at Shadowbrook, the children enjoyed privacy and independence. The grounds were like a giant playground. The kids could explore gardens designed by Frederick Law Olmsted, run across wide lawns, ride horses in the stables, or play tennis and croquet. In the winter, the property transformed into a snowy wonderland. The ponds froze over for skating, and sleigh rides through the Berkshires became a favorite family tradition. Anson Phelps Stokes, always passionate about sports and the outdoors, encouraged his children to live active lives. He was often seen riding horses, fishing in the streams, or playing golf across the fields. For him, Shadowbrook wasn't just a home. It was a paradise where he could combine his love for family, nature, and physical activity. Holiday gatherings and parties. Shadowbrook wasn't only about family life, it was also about entertaining. The Stokes family used their ballroom and dining halls to host some of the most dazzling gatherings in the Berkshires. At Christmas and New Year's, Shadowbrook came alive with decorations, music, and laughter. A massive Christmas tree was placed in one of the great halls, decorated with candles, ornaments, and gifts piled underneath. Guests, sometimes arriving from New York City or even farther, would stay in the guest suites and join the family for feasts that seemed endless. The dining rooms served meals prepared by teams of servants. The kitchens worked constantly to produce multi-course dinners with roasts, puddings, fine wines, and desserts that impressed even the most sophisticated guests. After dinner, the ballroom would fill with music and dancing. The minstrel gallery, originally designed for Homestead, now had its grander counterpart at Shadow Brook, where musicians performed as couples waltzed across the polished floors under glowing electric lights. For the wealthy elite of the Gilded Age, such parties weren't just entertainment. They were displays of power. To be invited to a Stokes celebration at Shadowbrook meant you were part of the most exclusive circle of society. Anson's love for the outdoors. Unlike some of his peers who enjoyed sitting back and letting others entertain them, Anson remained an active participant in country life. He loved horses, and he spent hours riding across the rolling Berkshire hills. He also enjoyed golf, hunting, and fishing. These activities were not just hobbies. They were part of the lifestyle that Shadowbrook had been built to support. The sprawling estate had been designed with recreation in mind. From its stables to its tennis courts, everything about Shadowbrook encouraged physical activity and outdoor fun. Anson's children often joined him in these pursuits, learning to ride, shoot, and fish under his guidance. For many years, it seemed as if the Stokes family had created the perfect life. They had wealth, influence, a spectacular home, and traditions that made their estate feel alive. But the dream was about to be shattered. The accident. In 1899, tragedy struck. While riding his horse, one of his favorite pastimes, Anson Phelps Stokes suffered a terrible accident. He was thrown from the horse and landed badly. The injuries were severe, especially to his leg. Doctors were called, but medical science at the time was not what it is today. Despite their best efforts, Anson's leg could not be saved. The only option was amputation. For a man who had built his life around physical strength, outdoor sports, and activity, losing a leg was devastating. This one event changed everything. Life after the accident. For years, Shadowbrook had been alive with sports, hunting trips, horseback rides, and games. But after the accident, Anson could no longer join in. The very activities that had once made the estate feel like paradise were now painful reminders of what he had lost. Without his leadership and energy, Shadowbrook felt different. The great halls, the lawns, and even the stables seemed quieter. The estate no longer had the same spark of joy that it once did. For Helen and the children, life also changed. They cared deeply for Anson, but they could see how the accident weighed on him. The family gatherings became less frequent and the parties less joyful. Shadowbrook, built for an active family life, began to feel too large, too empty, and too difficult to maintain. Leaving Shadowbrook. Eventually, the Stokes family made a painful decision. They chose to leave Shadowbrook behind. At first, they rented it out to others, but even that proved difficult. A house of more than 100 rooms required a huge staff and constant care. Few people had the resources to maintain it. After some time, the Stokes family sold Shadowbrook. Their dream home, once filled with children's laughter and glittering parties, was now someone else's responsibility. For the Stokes family, the accident of 1899 marked the end of their chapter at Shadowbrook. What had started as a dream of the perfect country estate had ended in tragedy and loss. But Shadowbrook's story was far from over. After the Stokes family, Carnegie, the Vanderbilts, and the end of a dream. When Anson Phelps Stokes and his family finally said goodbye to Shadowbrook, it marked the end of one of the most personal chapters in the estate's history. The mansion had been built for them, a reflection of Anson's ambition, wealth, and devotion to family life in the Berkshires. Yet tragedy had cut their dream short. Without the energy and joy of the Stokes family, Shadowbrook stood as a grand but empty shell, waiting for someone else to take it over. In the decades that followed, Shadowbrook would pass from one wealthy owner to another, each one adding to its story. From industrial magnates to socialites, the estate became less of a family home and more of a symbol of Gilded Age extravagance, a palace too big to survive in the modern world. Andrew Carnegie and Shadowbrook. Among the many figures who came to be linked with Shadowbrook, none was more famous than Andrew Carnegie, the steel magnate who rose from humble beginnings to become one of the richest men in the world. Carnegie had made a fortune building the American steel industry, and by the turn of the 20th century, he was living out a retirement devoted to philanthropy. He gave away much of his fortune to libraries, schools, and cultural institutions. Yet he also enjoyed the pleasures of wealth, and Shadowbrook was one of the places where he sought comfort and retreat. Carnegie rented Shadowbrook for a time, and later his family purchased it. To him, the estate offered what it had once promised the Stokes family: peace, beauty, and a place to gather loved ones. He enjoyed the sweeping views of the Berkshires and the luxury of the mansion's halls, but he also used Shadowbrook as a quiet escape from the world of business and fame. Visitors who came to see Carnegie at Shadowbrook were impressed not only by the size of the estate, but by the contrast between the house's grandeur and Carnegie's own relatively simple habits. Though he was the richest man in the world, he lived without the constant need for showy parties or flamboyant displays. Instead, Shadowbrook under Carnegie became a quieter place, a retreat where ideas, conversation, and philanthropy were discussed as much as leisure and entertainment. Carnegie's time at Shadowbrook gave the estate a new chapter, one tied not to tragedy, as it had been with Anson Stokes, but to the enduring legacy of a man whose wealth changed America. The Vanderbilts and other owners. But Shadowbrook's history didn't end with Carnegie. Like many Gilded Age estates, it passed from one wealthy hand to another. Families such as the Vanderbilts, already known for their palaces in Newport and along Fifth Avenue in New York, became associated with the house. The Vanderbilts were America's great dynasty of wealth and power, and their connection to Shadowbrook kept the estate in the spotlight. When they entertained guests there, Shadowbrook once again became a stage for society's elite, echoing with the laughter, music, and conversations of America's richest families. Other owners and tenants, including men like Howard Van Sinderen and Joseph Schotter, also left their marks. Schotter, known for his involvement in the turpentine industry, briefly held Shadowbrook but struggled with financial and personal troubles. To many, his ownership symbolized the difficulties of maintaining such a massive property. The recurring theme was clear: Shadowbrook was magnificent, but it was also nearly impossible to keep alive. With more than 100 rooms, acres of gardens, and countless staff members needed for daily upkeep, the estate demanded resources even beyond what most millionaires could manage. Shadowbrook as a hotel and institution. By the mid-20th century, the world had changed. The Gilded Age had faded, and America was entering a new era defined by wars, economic depression, and social change. Few families wanted or could afford to live in a house as enormous as Shadowbrook. Like many of its counterparts, Shadowbrook was transformed for new purposes. It became a hotel and later even housed a Jesuit seminary. Guests could rent rooms in what was once a private palace, dining in grand halls that had been built for one family's pleasure. Students and priests walked through corridors that had once echoed with the voices of the Stokes children and the conversations of Andrew Carnegie. For a time, this gave Shadowbrook a new lease on life. Instead of fading into ruin like so many other mansions, it adapted to the times. Yet the adaptation was never perfect. Maintaining a house of that size was costly no matter who lived there, and the estate always seemed to carry the weight of its own extravagance. The fire that ended it all. In 1956, tragedy struck Shadowbrook for the final time. A massive fire swept through the estate, and within hours the great house was gone. Flames consumed the wooden structure, and despite desperate efforts to save it, nothing could stop the inferno. When the smoke cleared, Shadowbrook, once the largest private home in America, was reduced to ashes. All that remained were fragments of stone walls, charred ruins, and the memories of the lives that had passed through its halls. The fire symbolized not just the end of Shadowbrook itself, but the passing of an entire era. The Gilded Age, with its palaces, fortunes, and displays of power, was long gone. America was moving forward into a new century, and the great houses of the past had little place in it. The meaning of Shadowbrook. Today, Shadowbrook is gone, but its story still captures the imagination. It was more than just a mansion. It was a mirror of America's Gilded Age, a time when wealth and ambition reached heights never seen before. For Anson Phelps Stokes, Shadowbrook was the dream of a perfect family estate, built to celebrate life, love, and success. For Andrew Carnegie, it was a quiet retreat, a place to reflect on a life that had reshaped the world. For the Vanderbilts and others, it was another stage on which to display power and prestige. Yet, no matter who owned it, Shadowbrook carried the same truth. It was too big, too extravagant, and too fragile to last forever. Its destruction by fire was almost symbolic, a fiery end to an era when men believed they could build palaces in the wilderness and make them last for generations. All that remains of Shadowbrook today are memories, photographs, and the echoes of its story. But in those echoes, we can still hear the laughter of the Stokes children playing in the gardens, the music of Carnegie's guests drifting from the ballroom, and the whispers of a time when the American dream was measured not in simplicity, but in stone, steel, and size. Shadowbrook may be gone, but its legacy as one of the greatest houses of the Gilded Age endures, reminding us of the heights of human ambition and the inevitable decline that follows when grandeur outpaces reality.